One of the most interesting and one of the most useful optionals in UPSC is history optional. If you want to score very high in history optional, first you should try to go against the three basic misconceptions which are there about this optional. The first basic misconcept is that history optional is very factual. It's absolutely wrong. The optional is very conceptual. Second misconcept is that the syllabus is very lengthy. It's again a misconcept because the history syllabus is very well structured. That is why it looks very exhaustive. And the third misconcept is that the maps are very difficult to deal with. It's absolutely wrong. The reality is that the map works are super easy to deal with. I'll show you a question of your PC. See here. This is history optional 2013 question. It says that awakened political consciousness of Indian masses bound with dishonorable and cowardly insults of the British led to the movement of non-cooperation. Basically, the question is asking about the factors that led to non-cooperation movement. It was because of awakened political consciousness of the masses, and at the same time, it was also a reaction against the British insults imposed on Indian masses. Now, I told you that there's a sheer misconception that history optional is very factual. Look, facts are not history, just like a dictionary is not literature. Intelligent interpretation of the facts, that is what is history. Now, if we try to tackle this question conceptually, we have to figure out about the factors that led to the non-cooperation movement, which is started in August 1920 formally. First of all, it was the time just after the First World War. The time period of the First World War was 1914 to 1918 and 1919. 1918, the war had ended, but the peace treaties were finalized in 1919. Now, during the First World War, it was a big war. All the European imperial powers, they were fighting against each other. And that is why this was the time the imperial powers, they were looking for the support from their colonies during the war. So during the war, British, like colonial powers, they started promising self determination to their colonies. For example, the British came up with August Declaration in 1917. Now, the August Declaration promised progressive realization of a responsible government in India within the British Empire. Now, when all these promises were there, it was just there to fool the people of the colonies to get the support during the war. But after the war, the colonial powers like Britain, they started going back on their promises. That created a strong reaction from the people here in India. Second factor, during the First World War, all the imperial powers, they were using propaganda to expose the exploitative nature of the rule of each other in their colonies to cut the support of the colonies toward the rival imperial power. The British exposed the Germans how exploitative the Germans were there in their rule over their colonies. The Germans retaliated by exposing how the British were exploiting their colonies like India, and that all led to more and more awareness among the people. During the First World War, there was also the Bolshevik Revolution or the Russian Revolution of 1917. Now, this proved to be very, very inspiring for the Indian people. Increasing awareness was there among the Indians about all this because this was the time in Russia, the general people, they toppled the powerful autocracy of Tsar. Certainly, when the Russians could have done that, why could have not the Indians done this in India against the British government? Again, the new communist government of Russia or USSR that it got converted into promised the support to the national movements across the world. Certainly, that is why the Russian Revolution proved to be very inspiring for the Indian people and intensified a national movement. Above all, you will find that the First World War had created a huge economic crisis, and the economic crisis like situation, the British, they had diverted huge resources away from India. This economic crisis like situation had led to already a big political churning. So first thing that we figure out that there was increasing political awareness among the masses. At this stage, the British committed the blunder of putting so many insults for the Indian people. For example, the Act of 1919, the Government of India Act 1919 that was brought, it came up with diarchy. That was a complete failure. The Indians were expecting a good constitutional reform after the First World War, but the British came up with a failed diarchy like system in the Government of India Act 1919, leading to huge disappointment among the people. Not only this, the British came up with Rowlatt Act, no, that would authorize the government to imprison anybody without any conviction or without any trial. It was certainly a direct step to suppress Indian national movement. Certainly, this led to a lot of reaction among the Indian people. Now, one of the reactions would also be in Amritsar, and eventually we all know that that led to the Jallianwala Bagh issue. Now, Jallianwala Bagh issue, and after this, the Hunter Commission, which was appointed by the British government, further led to massive resentment among the people. So, now the people were very angry. There was a lot of political churning and there was a lot of economic crisis. And at this stage, you will find that the Gandhian movement, the Gandhian movement led us toward the era of mass movement that eventually led to the first all India big mass movement in the form of non-cooperation movement. Now, if we have to write one introduction for this question, can we not write that the reaction to the British colonial policy of betrayal? Yes, after the war, they did not come up with the reforms. That was betrayal, coupled with the crisis created by the First World War that led to so much awareness among the Indians. Basically, all that coupled together, and that led to the start of non-cooperation movement. In conclusion, can we not say that when the First World War and the British colonial policy had already created such a massive political churning in India, at this stage, the Gandhian movement was already on rise, and Gandhiji guided us towards the era of mass movement for the first time. Look, there were three deflection points in Indian national movement. One of them was partition of Bengal. For the first time, from the era of constitutional agitation of prayers and petition, we moved toward the era of extra constitutional agitation of Swadeshi and boycott. The second permanent deflection was the Rowlatt Act. This was the time of non-cooperation movement. It was the time, for the first time, we moved toward the era of mass movement. And we never reverted back. This was the time the era of mass movement started. Additional information, the third deflection point was Simon Commission. No? Simon Commission was appointed in 1927 and came in India in 1928. This was again a permanent deflection because for the first time we started demanding Purna Swaraj. This non-cooperation movement was basically at the second deflection point. We had already moved toward the era of mass movement for the first time. Super conceptual is the question, and certainly we should try to approach the question conceptually only. Now I'll go against the second misconcept that the map work is very difficult to deal with. See here, the map work is super easy to deal with. I'll take one question. No, I'll take one question here from UPSC History Optional 2023. Now I'll take one example here. It says that seventh of the point was one ancient dockyard. First of all, you have to understand here that now the map question pattern in UPSC has completely changed, and now it has become very super easy. How? Because already they will give you map of India and the sites plotted on it. You do not have to plot the sites. The sites are already plotted on it, and you just have to describe about the sites. Now, if this is so, if you try to match the dockyard point, that is eighth point on the map, we can match it like this. No? So a dockyard in Gujarat in ancient time is super easy information. We all know that in Lothal, no? In Lothal in Gujarat, from the time of IVC, we found a dockyard. And it is one of the earliest evidences of a dockyard like a structure that we have found in the world. A super easy map question this was. I'll give you one more example here. This map question is from 2022 history optional paper. It says that we have to figure out one Harappan UNESCO site and we have to map this with 7th. So 7th. Again, the Harappan site in Gujarat. UNESCO site it is. Recently it was in news. Dholavira in Gujarat recently was given the UNESCO heritage status. Why? Because of its extensive water management system. Dholavira is considered a unique IVC site. Now that is what the question that was asked by UPSC in the map question. Super easy it is to tackle the map questions. Now, if you talk about a misconcept again about history optional, is that syllabus is vast. The syllabus is very well structured, and it is that simple syllabus that anyway, no, in GS you have to study 70% of the part of the syllabus. GS anyway would cover GS history anyway would cover nearly 70% of the part of history optional. If you can add 30% of the more analysis, you can easily go to the history optional level. Is that simple optional. How much is the overlap between GS and history optional? I can show you by the example. See here. This is a question from history optional 2022. It says that discuss how fascism was response to the post-war situation. So post-war, the post-First World War situation arising out of the political instability, thwarted national hopes and fears of the spread of communism. So the question, history optional that asked was from 2022 and it talked about fascism, rise of fascism in Europe. In 2021, in UPSC GS paper, the question that was asked by UPSC was that there arose a serious challenge to the democratic state system between the two world wars. Again, basically, this is talking about rise of fascism between the two world wars. So after the First World War, very similar questions they are asked. Just 30% of the more analysis, and certainly you directly jump to the optional level. Then again, tackling history optional is always very handy when you're tackling the GS part. So many questions directly in prelims they are asked as well. I'll give you one more example here. One UPSC question that was asked in 2022 map question was 10th. It was asking about earliest Satvahana capital. Now, if you try to match 10 with earliest Satvahana capital, basically they are talking about Dhanyakatak. That was the ancient name of Amravati. Now, Amravati or Dhanyakatak was the ancient capital of the Satvahanas and it was the famous Buddhist site as well. See a super interesting question that was asked by UPSC in 2023. They asked that in which one of the following regions was Dhanyakatak, which flourished as a prominent Buddhist center under the Mahasanghikas located. Don't you think that now this prelims question that came after this UPSC history optional paper next year, basically it's super easy to answer. Dhanyakatak or Amravati was a place in the region of Andhra. Super simple. UPSC prelims 2023 question this is. This is why I always say that one of the easiest and the most scoring optional is history optional. Super easy to tackle. And there is a big overlap with GS. One of the major advantages of history optional is that there is no current affairs overlap. And that is why so much of the time it saves of the candidate that can be dedicated towards revising the class notes and solving the UPSC previous year's questions. Now, this is what I wanted to discuss with you in this session. Very soon, I would be there with a new session. Thank you so much.